Blood soaked through Emma's tattered coat as she lay unconscious on the sidewalk, snow gathering on her pale face. 5-year-old Lily tugged at her father's expensive wool coat. "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" The question hung in the frigid night air as millionaire tech CEO James Anderson stared at the homeless woman, something in her face stirring a memory he tried desperately to forget. If you're touched by this story of unexpected connection and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of our shared humanity. James Anderson had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a thriving tech company valued at billions, and a closet of tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But since losing his wife Sarah to cancer 3 years ago, the only thing that truly mattered was his daughter Lily. The precocious 5-year-old with her mother's eyes and unfiltered honesty was his reason for waking each morning. They were returning from the Nutcracker Ballet, Lily's Christmas gift, when they found Emma. The December night had turned brutal, temperature dropping well below freezing as the first major snowstorm of the season descended upon New York City. "Daddy, she looks cold. Why doesn't she go inside?" Lily pressed, her small hand squeezing his. James had initially intended to call an ambulance and continue home. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But when he knelt beside the woman to check her pulse, he noticed the small tattoo on her wrist, a constellation of stars identical to one Sarah had. "Sir, should I bring the car around?" his driver asked, standing at a respectful distance. James made a decision that would change everything. "No, Marcus. Help me get her into the car. We're taking her home." "Sir? Are you certain that's wise?" Marcus had been with James for a decade, long enough to speak frankly. "No, I'm not certain at all," James admitted, already slipping off his coat to wrap around the unconscious woman. "But I can't leave her here to die." The woman, Emma Sullivan, woke in a panic hours later, finding herself in a bedroom larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. The last thing she remembered was curling up in the doorway of a closed coffee shop, trying to escape the wind as her fever raged and her infected leg wound throbbed mercilessly. "Where am I?" she croaked, attempting to sit up. A private nurse James had called immediately urged her to lie back down. "You're safe," the nurse explained. "Mr. Anderson found you collapsed on the street. You have a severe infection and hypothermia. He brought you to his home for medical care." Emma tried to process this information through her fever-addled mind. "Mr. Anderson? I don't know any." The door cracked open, and a tiny face peeked in, golden curls framing curious blue eyes. "Are you awake now? Daddy said you were very sick." Before the nurse could usher the child out, James appeared behind his daughter, placing protective hands on her shoulders. Emma's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "You're James Anderson. The James Anderson." Everyone in New York knew of the tech billionaire, especially after his wife's tragic death made headlines. James nodded once, his expression unreadable. "How are you feeling? Why would you help someone like me?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was Lily who answered. "Because you were sleeping in the snow, and Daddy says people shouldn't have to do that." The next days passed in a blur for Emma. The infection that had been slowly killing her began to retreat under proper medical care. James kept his distance, checking in only briefly, always with Lily at his side. The child, however, was fascinated by their unexpected guest, bringing her books and drawings. "Do you like unicorns?" "I have 17 unicorn toys," Lily informed Emma seriously on the third day. "I can share if you want." Emma's throat tightened. "That's very kind of you, Lily." "Were you always homeless?" the child asked with the direct curiosity only children possess. James, entering with a tray of food, nearly dropped it. "Lily. We don't ask questions like that." "It's okay," Emma said, though her face flushed with shame. "No, Lily, I wasn't always homeless. I used to be a nurse, actually." James's eyebrows rose in surprise. What happened? Emma looked away. Life happened. Bad choices. Worse luck. She didn't elaborate, but later that night, when Lily was asleep, she told James everything, how she'd lost her nursing job after developing an addiction to pain medications following a car accident. How her husband left, taking their savings. How one misfortune led to another until she found herself on the streets, too ashamed to contact what family she had left. The tattoo on your wrist, James said after she finished. That's why I brought you home. My wife had the same one. Emma's fingers traced the small constellation. Cassiopeia. The queen who boasted of her beauty. Sarah never boasted, but she loved the stars, James said, his voice soft with memory. She used to say we're all made of stardust, so the constellations were like family portraits. She sounds wonderful. She was. James stood abruptly. The doctor says you should be well enough to leave by next week. I've arranged for a temporary apartment and some leads on jobs that might fit with your nursing background. Emma blinked back tears. Why are you doing all this? James paused at the door. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What good is it if I can't help someone who crossed my path? But both knew there was more to it than simple charity. As Emma recovered, she began to spend more time with Lily. The little girl was starved for female attention, for someone who would braid her hair and listen to her stories about school. The household staff were kind but professional, and James, though a devoted father, often struggled to connect with the more traditionally feminine aspects of raising a daughter. You're good with her, James observed one afternoon, finding them painting each other's nails. Emma smiled. She makes it easy. She's an incredible child. She's lonely, James admitted. I work too much. Her friends' mothers arrange playdates, but I never know how to initiate that sort of thing. You're doing your best, Emma said. That's all any parent can do. The week stretched into 2, then 3. Emma's departure date kept shifting as she became more integrated into their lives. She began helping with Lily's homework, preparing meals alongside the housekeeper, even accompanying them to Lily's winter choir concert. But tension simmered beneath the surface. James's executive assistant, Victoria, made her disapproval clear. You know nothing about this woman, Victoria warned during a private moment at the office. She could be manipulating you. The press would have a field day if they found out. I'm aware of how it looks, James replied stiffly. Is it because she reminds you of Sarah? Because she's nothing like your wife, James. Sarah came from a good family, had a career. That's enough. James's voice cut like steel. Emma stays as long as she wants to. That's final. Meanwhile, Emma herself felt increasingly conflicted. The luxury of James's world was both seductive and alienating. She didn't belong here, among cashmere throws and original artwork. Yet Lily's attachment to her grew stronger each day, and Emma couldn't deny her own feelings were changing too, not just for the child, but for James. The crisis point came at Christmas. James invited Emma to join their small celebration, which included only Lily, himself, and his elderly mother who visited from Boston. Eleanor Anderson was a formidable woman who had raised James alone after his father abandoned them. She sized Emma up with shrewd eyes over Christmas dinner. So you were living on the streets when my son found you? She asked bluntly. Mother, James warned. Yes, Emma answered honestly. I was dying, and your son saved my life. Eleanor nodded slowly. My James always had a hero complex. Wanted to rescue everyone, injured birds, stray cats, people in trouble. It's not like that, James began. Isn't it? Eleanor challenged. You found a wounded bird and brought her home. But what happens when she's healed enough to fly away? The question hung in the air as Lily obliviously chattered about her presence. Later, after Eleanor retired to the guest room and Lily was tucked in bed, Emma found James on the balcony, staring at the city lights. "Your mother's right," Emma said. "I should leave after the holidays." James turned, his face half in shadow. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. This," she gestured to the opulent apartment, "isn't real life. At least, not for someone like me." "Someone like you," James repeated. "And what kind of person is that, exactly?" "You know what I mean. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but charity has limits." James stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Is that what you think this is? Charity?" Emma faltered. "What else could it be?" "Maybe it's selfish," James said quietly. "Maybe I like having you here. Maybe Lily needs you. Maybe he stopped abruptly. "You what?" Emma whispered. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Then Lily's voice called from inside, breaking the spell. "Daddy? I had a bad dream." "We'll finish this conversation later," James promised, brushing past Emma. But later never came. The next morning, while James took Lily to her grandmother's for the day, Emma made a decision. She packed the few belongings she'd accumulated, clothes James had bought her, a bracelet Lily had made, and left a note. "Thank you for saving my life. Some birds aren't meant to be kept, even in golden cages. Please tell Lily I'm sorry." She took only what she had arrived in, plus a small amount of cash James had given her for emergencies. The temporary apartment he'd arranged still waited, but Emma couldn't bear to accept more from him. She would start over properly, on her own terms. New Year's Eve found her in a modest women's shelter, having secured a position as a nurse's aide at a local clinic, willing to overlook her history in exchange for her experience. It wasn't much, but it was honest work and a step toward rebuilding her life. As midnight approached, Emma found herself on the shelter's roof, watching distant fireworks spark over the river. She thought of Lily, who would be watching the same sky, perhaps asking her father why Emma had left without saying goodbye. "I hoped I'd find you here." Emma whirled around, heart pounding. James stood by the rooftop door, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "How did you?" "I have resources," he said simply, closing the distance between them. "Why did you leave like that?" Emma wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "Because staying any longer would have made leaving impossible." "Then don't leave." The words hung in the frigid air between them. "James, be realistic. What would people say? The billionaire and the homeless addict?" "Former addict," he corrected gently. "And I stopped caring what people said when Sarah died. The only opinion that matters to me is Lily's, and she's been asking for you every day." "It's not that simple." "It is," James interrupted. "I was alone. Lily was alone. Then we found you, and suddenly we weren't anymore. Isn't that worth fighting for?" "What exactly are you proposing?" Emma asked, afraid to hope. "I'm proposing we find out what this is between us, without any deadline or expectations. Stay in the apartment I arranged if you want independence. Keep your job. But come home for dinner. Help Lily with her science projects. Let me take you both ice skating in the park. And if it doesn't work out?" James took her hands in his. "Then at least we tried. But I think it will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Lily wanted you to have this. She said it was urgent." Emma opened it with trembling fingers to find a child's drawing carefully folded inside. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall one labeled Daddy, a small one labeled Me, and a medium-sized one labeled Emma. Above them, in a child's uneven printing, My Family. As the first fireworks of the new year exploded overhead, Emma made her choice. 6 months later, Lily tugged at her father's sleeve during a charity gala, her eyes wide as she watched Emma across the room, radiant in a borrowed gown. "Daddy, is Emma going to be my new mommy someday?" James smiled, his eyes never leaving Emma as she laughed with his mother, the two women having formed an unlikely friendship. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" Lily nodded solemnly. "She makes the best pancakes. And she knows how to braid hair like a princess. And she makes you smile again. She does, doesn't she?" James agreed, fingering the small velvet box in his pocket. The ring inside had been his grandmother's, reset with sapphires to match Emma's eyes. Emma caught his gaze across the crowded room and smiled, not the hesitant smile of someone afraid to hope, but the confident smile of a woman who had found her place in the world again. Later that night, as they walked home through the park rather than taking the car, Lily skipping ahead to chase fireflies, James finally asked the question he'd been carrying since Christmas. Emma's yes was immediate and certain, followed by happy tears as Lily raced back to them, somehow understanding that something momentous had happened. "Does this mean you'll never leave again?" the little girl asked, wrapping her arms around Emma's waist. "Never," Emma promised, kneeling to meet Lily's eyes. "Some birds find their nest in the most unexpected places." 1 year to the day after James found Emma nearly dead on that snowy sidewalk, they stood in the same cathedral where he'd once said goodbye to Sarah. But today was about beginnings, not endings. Lily served as flower girl, solemnly sprinkling rose petals before practically skipping down the aisle. In the front pew, Eleanor Anderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her initial skepticism long replaced by fierce acceptance of the woman who had brought joy back to her son and granddaughter. As Emma walked toward him, James thought of all the random chances that had brought them to this moment: a ballet running late, a sudden snowstorm, the decision to walk 1 block rather than take the car directly home. Some might call it coincidence. James preferred to think of it as fate. And as they spoke their vows, promising to cherish each other through whatever life might bring, Emma thought of the question that had started it all: "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" Sometimes the simplest questions lead to the most profound answers. Sometimes people find family in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, a moment of compassion on a snowy night can change everything. The moral of their story wasn't that money solves problems or that everyone gets a fairy tale ending. It was simpler and more universal than that, that human connection is what saves us in the end. That every person deserves a second chance. That family isn't always about blood, but about who stays by your side when the world turns cold. As they left the cathedral as husband and wife, with Lily between them holding both their hands, Emma looked up at the winter sky. Somewhere above the city lights, Cassiopeia watched over them, the constellation that had once been just a tattoo, but now symbolized everything she had found: beauty, connection, and the family she thought she'd never have. Sometimes, the most broken paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes, the question, "Why is she sleeping here?" leads to the answer: because she hadn't yet found her way home.